So we are back. This portion of our presentation is going to focus on the three schools that we identified earlier. And so those three schools, which I realize that we've never really named for you all, Berkmar High School, Lawrenceville Elementary School, and Radloff Middle School. So we're going to start with, they're just in reverse order by level. There's no rhyme or reason in terms of them being lowest performing of the three. It's just you have to pick an order. And so, not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but because context is important, and because most of those accountability metrics are based heavily on the most recent closed year of data, this is just showing you a snapshot of the 23-24 year for each of those schools. So this first slide just kind of is a general overview of the building in terms of enrollment for Berkmar High School. So the official number of students based on October FTE, so funded, and then staffing. And then there's some comparisons to other high schools in the district, and then the district as a whole. So the next one is a similar look. This one focused, again, a slightly deeper dive on the students. So looking at some of the things around climate, well-being, all of those pieces. It also looks at attendance. So we know that one of the first things is a child can't learn what they're not there to receive. And we know that attendance across the nation has been an issue post-COVID. So our schools monitor that. To the left, you see the piece around just general regular attendance. Now this one is important to note. Regular attendance is defined as 95% of their enrolled days. So for our, what we hope is a typical child, that's a full years of enrollment, and that number is 180. But for children in Gwinnett, it could be 100 days. It could be 30 days, because they may have transferred in at a different point in time. So it's 95% of whatever enrolled days they work for that school year. Now, on the other side of that, to the right, is the chronically absent. That piece is about 10% or more of their enrolled days. So given a little bit of flexibility. But on both of those definitions, that absence does not matter whether it is excused or unexcused. Because regardless of the reason, if they're not present in the building, they're not getting the instruction. Oh, yes, sir.
95% excused or unexcused?
Yes, excused or unexcused, doesn't matter. Because we're tracking, are they there to get it? And then the last but not least are the actual student performance metrics for the 23-24 school year. And so this, again, to the left, you're looking at milestones results. High school, this is pretty easy because it's typically only one grade level per assessment. Elementary, middle, it'll be an aggregation of those grade levels. So when you look at ELA and math and science, it'll be multiple grade levels. But for high school, it's very different. They only do it once per their education period for milestones. And so you see the comparison for the school and for the district. And then because it's high school, you see the other high school metrics that we monitor: graduation rate, post-secondary participation, in terms of SAT, ACT, their college readiness benchmark that's set by College Board, but we put the percentage of students that hit that, and then of course T.E.A, advanced coursework, and English language proficiency. And so now that we've set up kind of the context, and it's there for your reference, the last but not least is the staff. So this gives us a slightly deeper dive into the staff picture. And it just talks about advanced degrees in comparison, that building compared to the district, and then the level, so high school. And then the same thing about years of experience. So this just sets the context for the building, so you have reference as we go into a deeper dive of what the specific support plan looks like for Berkmar High School. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Nebo.
Thank you, Chief Harmon. I appreciate the overview of those 4 slides because it speaks, going back to some of the conversation earlier about the complexity of school improvement. Going through those 4 slides, there's so many pieces that go into the school improvement piece that arrive to those 4 components of the Westhead framework that we shared. But if you think about the day-to-day work of principaling and leading a school, just the complexity of it and the number of pieces that you have to attend to. So just wanted to tie that into the complexity piece and recognition that while there are some things that we can do today to make things better, real school improvement that lasts, takes time to happen. So I want to explain to you how I set up this portion of our presentation. It's going to look the same for all three schools. We're going to look at some of the supports through three different lenses. The first one being just from the viewpoint of the cluster superintendent and the work that he or she is doing in that building. The second slide will refer to partnership work between Chief West Division and the SIO Division. Page 3, the third page of each of these, is going to refer to other supports that we pour in. I've color-coded them. This is kind of what the colors represent. The ones that are in black are going to be common to they should be common to all of our level 4 or 5 schools. These are pretty standard expectations that we should be pouring into schools that fall into level 4 or 5 range of the WSA. What's in blue are some of the more unique touches that the cluster superintendent or that the partnership among divisions or that HR has done based on specific needs of that building. I do want to share that this is not comprehensive, this is not exhaustive, because in fairness, we could talk today for 2.5 hours about Berkmar, and we could talk for 2.5 hours today about Lawrenceville. So this is a list of some of the high-level, bigger pieces. Welcome to having a more detailed conversation at any point about any of the three schools. I also want to share that each of those lines looks like this a thing. They all have multiple things packed in them, right? So there might be a list of 3 things up there, but please understand that that list of 3 things will simplify into a line on a presentation is a really high-level, dynamic thing that takes a lot of people, resources, and time to execute. So I don't want to minimize the significance of the work of the school or the people who are doing it. All right, so Berkmar, their cluster superintendent is a great match for their school. Right? He's a former high school principal who led a school with a very diverse population, led it to a very high-level graduation rate that was able to be sustained. Well, not perfect, still room for growth, obviously. But a school that was known for its warmth, its caring, okay, a school that its staff stick around and enjoyed the leadership that they had under that principal. Yeah, so the cluster superintendent who oversees Berkmar is a great fit for the work that needs to be done there. So referencing that cluster superintendent's past experience, he principaled a high school that was known for the warm environment that it had in it for the high levels. Duluth High School, Dr. Davidson at that point. Right, in a school that really maximized a lot of the student potential that it had in it. So he's able to speak to the quality of the work that needs to happen in the building. So in black, and I'm not going to repeat these for every school because again, they're the same, right? His work is to be there at the start of the year with the principal on the development of the LSPI, work the principal through it to make sure he's reaching the right, or she's reaching the right goals, conduct those 45-day reviews we spoke of earlier, right? That's incumbent in his work, and make adjustments to the practices in the building as he sees necessary. This next piece about touch points with the principal, and that especially that level 4 or 5, is a really important part of the work. Right? So Dr. Davison has ensured that he has daily touch points with our principal at Berkmar. Oftentimes these are stop-by visits, but if they're not stop-by visits, they're on the phone with great frequency right now to discuss their progress, to discuss issues that arise, and to make sure that principal has a high level of support. His calendar would show you 2 to 3 formal visits there. So working our way down to blue. So formal visits, when I mean formal, these are going to be calendar. They're typically going to be 3 hours in length, 2 to 3 hours in length. Okay, they're going to involve a real structured approach. He also, though, conducts a lot of informal visits there. One of the benefits of the move from assistant superintendent to cluster superintendent was a much more efficient use of our time. So as a middle school AST, I might have to drive from McConnell one day on the Archer cluster, okay, down to Grace Snell. You're spending a lot of time in your car on days like that. As a cluster superintendent, you're able to move with much more fluidity between the schools in a certain area. So this superintendent, or cluster superintendent, has multiple informal visits to that school as well. Those are those pop-in visits where he's able to see what school looks like in a really authentic, generic setting. I want to focus on his 2 to 3 formal visits first. And this is a cadence that typically we follow. Okay, when we work with our school support plan schools, our schools who have been identified, we always hyper-focus on the areas that the data tells us are in need. Okay, and I'll get to the next page and I'll show you, but for Berkmar, it's all 4 core areas, plus multilingual student support, special ed supports, and gifted supports. There's a lot of support being poured into this building. The first visit that he goes on is designed for him to go in and see a specific grade level team. So we're going to go into 11th grade language arts. We're going to go into take biology. We know that biology and algebra 1 in 9th grade are gateways to graduation. If you can get those under a kid's belt, the chance of them graduating on time is optimized. Those are those gateway classes that hold kids back, right? So that's an area that likely, and that you should be visiting. So he's gonna go into those classrooms and make sure that what he sees is a limited amount of variance and an alignment to the AKS and really high quality teaching practice happening in those rooms. That information will inform his second visit, which is where he sees the CLT for that team, right? So now we're in the curriculum leadership team, making sure that the planning process is there. They afford teachers the opportunity to deliver high quality instruction. The CLT is where the special sauce exists in the building. If you can't get your CLT right, if you can't get that planning time right, execution in the classroom doesn't miraculously happen on its own. We're speaking of new teachers, novice teachers, that CLT is their best professional development. You can send folks to classes and bring in experts from the outside, but the CLT is the ultimate spot where PD has to take place at a high level. So our presence in these schools that have, Chief Harden spoke very well about the gains we've made. Berkmar is a school where the human resource piece is a work in progress, and transparency. 54% of their teachers this year are 0 to 5 years, as up from last year, and well above the district average. Those teachers don't get better if their CLT is not right. So he has to spend that time there as well. His third visit is gonna be a hybrid of those formal visits, making sure that that work done is actually happening more continuously. Going back to,
Take note of that.
yeah, thank you. One of his focuses, this is specific to Berkmar, that third indented bullet in blue, is the work with his leadership team on providing actionable and meaningful feedback. He's working with Tiffany Suggs and her team. She's kind of our expert over the G-test process here. She does an amazing job. She's fantastic. Chief Harden, she's fantastic. Goes into buildings and works with their leadership team and makes sure there's integrator reliability and an effective use of our G-test process so we can get feedback back to teachers that matters, okay, that matters. You can use G-test as a compliance piece, or you can usually access it and use it as a capacity building piece. Ms. Suggs' work and how the work of Berkmar with the leadership team is to make meaningful feedback the norm in that building. Those are the big bricks when it comes to feedback, but the mortar between the bricks is the informal observations and the daily feedback that teachers need. So this is key to the work that's happening there too. The final piece that I wanted to share, the work of the cluster superintendent. We were talking earlier about great classrooms and replicating practice, taking teachers from one room to go see another one. This is what it can look like. The same thing happens from school to school. Right? So we've partnered this principal with other principals who are doing great work. Should have listed it on there, but what we've come to know as the South Gwinnett model is something now that this principal is working to employ. The visibility of teachers in hallways, the constant monitoring, getting APs out of their office. You should see at Berkmar now, APs who are their desks are now in the hallways. The office is now in the hallway. And it creates visibility, it creates a structure, the opportunity to give kids a high five when they walk by. Things you can't do if you're behind 2 layers of doors to get to the office that you sit in. Other interventions that involve other schools. Just the other day, this cluster superintendent took these 3 principals out after hours to a meal to sit and talk cohort grad rate. But working with Meadow Creek High School, which is a very similar student population, but a grad rate that's significantly higher, right? How did you do that? Let's talk about the work that you've done in the building. But leadership that can't stay, to your point, behind a curtain, right? So let's move the curtain aside and find the best practices. So networking this principal with that principal. So for Meadow Creek, the comparison was grad rate, but also data processes. As we know, the data processes at Meadow Creek High School are amongst the most exemplary in the district. Right? But then also leveraging the principal at Duluth High School right now. A wizard she is with student interventions. She knows how to get her staff to pull the best out of her students. So the interventions and the credit recovery component We wanna be high quality tier 1 schools, like that's our business, but you also gotta have a robust credit recovery program that's organized and logical and makes sense and fills in gaps for kids who, for whatever reason, didn't get that credit they needed. So going back to 9th grade biology, when did you as a school offer that student a chance to recover that credit? For whatever reason, they didn't get it. I moved here late from out of the country, I didn't get it when I should have, or I struggled at it for whatever reason. So the credit recovery models at Duluth are really solid ones. So networking this principle with those principles in a deliberate way, okay, discovering those best practices, and then putting use. And I'll get to a second how we see a little bit of evidence of that. That's happened with the new principal. Yes, ma'am. Well, it's gonna, but it can't be once. Right? Those kind of meetings. Correct. Yep. Well, it's been introduced. Yeah. Those are big things. So you got to introduce them first. And you walk through this. It takes a lot to build muscle memory with those things. But yes, ma'am, they have. Right. The partnership page that I discussed between cluster superintendent and T&L. So Berkmar is identified by our WSA as a level 4 managed school. Okay, so level 5 is called structured, level 4 is managed. It's receiving T&L support from Chief West team for all 4 core subjects, as well as for their multilingual kids, okay, and their gifted population. Right, so that's unique because everybody's got a different school support plan. Back to the black ink that you'll see on everybody's. Right, their school support plan identified needs in all the areas you see in parentheses right there. These are all the different data sources that we use to identify the needs of this building. GMAS, multilingual English proficiency, reading on grade level, chronic absenteeism rate, which we'll talk about in a minute. We have seen an improvement there. You saw last year was at 56.5%, which is an astronomical number. And I wore my Sweetwater shirt today because the Berkmar cluster is home for me. That's a painful number to hear. When 57% of your kids are chronically absent, it's really hard to make gains. This year's at 44%, still way too high. But if we can get that kind of reduction each year, we can start to make some sustainable gains. All right, T&L coaches working in classrooms, bite-sized PD, and deliberate work with Katana's office, Harris's office, work with our ML supports, and we'll talk about those in a second as well. So here's where Chief West team comes in blue in the second half of this page. First, this is, I really appreciate this work, the work of Chief West core directors with this leadership team on making sure they understand how CLT should be run and what the appropriate tier 1 instructional practices are in classrooms in each core area. They're in the building. Think about the manpower that this suggests, 1 to 2 times per week for math and language arts support. So Dr. Davidson's not there. There's a great likelihood that Chief West folks are, right? In CLTs, because a large part of the work of Chief West team is in CLTs. Recognizing if you get the CLT right, best practice grows from there. But they're in classrooms as well. So to that first indented bullet, okay, the work oftentimes of our friends from T&L is in that CLT coaching, how to lead it, and they do that by modeling. So oftentimes you'll see her folks, her coaches and specialists in the CLT leading it, modeling it, and then gradually releasing it back to the teacher lead. But individual coaching cycles are part of their work too. So from their classroom walks, they're able to say, you know, Mr. Evil's got potential, but there's some work that we can do to make his practice more effective. And that's where individual coaching cycles take hold. All of that emphasis on high quality tier 1 instruction happening across rooms. This is a building also that has to grow its AP culture. It's culture around gifted students. So there's partnership with Ms. Riles Jenkins and her office to support that culture there. There must be a more deliberate approach to making sure that we have opportunity and access, going back to that goal 2D I told you about a while ago in LCI, right? For some students who have, quite frankly, not been given the opportunity that they deserve.
Right, we have the data on that.
I can get it for you. And there's
And
some.
not just personal, but just really assessing the availability, access, and opportunity.
So there is, this is not as specific as you're asking, but at a high level, there is on that third page of data that Chief Harmon, but Dr. Treese, to your point, this one only talks to you about 12th graders, right? So it's not necessarily as detailed as you want, but you can see the percent of 12th graders at Berkmar who have completed an AP or IB course or dual enrollment. And you see that it lies a little bit below, well, not a little bit, 10% percentage points below, but absolutely, that's data that we can get.
And that is identified.
not be a system effort.
Yeah.
It may be a school effort, how, an implementation decision. So, North Gwinnett, 25 years ago, did AP for all. It was radical. And they were this is the thing that was interesting when I was talking to the former principal. We think of North Gwinnett as this high-flying, of course. They were 9 of 13, ranked 9 out of 13 high schools when they implemented AP for all. And now they're usually number 2 behind. But it took a while. But yeah, they saw that and addressed it as a school, and it was kind of radical. And shift at the time, and now they're friendly number 2 behind Jesus.
So, a couple of things. So we have there's an ed brief that we have, we can send you around AP access for our district. And, we continue to monitor all phases of implementation for AP. So enrollment, course completion, performance, and then actually taking the assessment. So we kind of monitor all the process. So.
We also have data around how we've been able to identify more students who do not have seen their AP potential as well. So we have some data reports that kind of reflects that across all of our high schools, and that's differentiated by student group.
And for our divisions, OMP, our organizational management plan, one of our most important KPIs is that rate. All right, so that's something that we evaluate in our meetings as well. The final page for support for Berkmar, and then Dr. Treese, to your point earlier, I'll pause for any questions before moving to our second school. Well, it's bookended on the top and the bottom with some consistent supports that we provide to our schools who receive managed or structured support. First, in the spirit of quality improvement, okay, you'll see some components at the top. I do want to draw your attention to the bottom though, and make sure that we recognize the support that we provide for novice APs through our leadership development team, Chief Harden's division, the support they receive there. The leader coaches that are provided for a newer novice principal, as Mr. Zaragoza, Dr. Zaragoza would have, but also the support that we provide for each member of that leadership team as they grow to support their colleagues. Specifically in that middle section, there's a lot going on at Berkmar to support it. The Gallup data that you have, just speaking of full transparency, you're not going to have the data you have in these and have a school that achieves at this level. Big believer that climate and culture eat strategy for breakfast. If you don't have the climate and culture in the building right, you're not going to have. A consistent theme amongst these 3 schools is a Gallup score that's well below the district average, right? And that is not gone unnoticed. That's the work of all of us that are in front of you now to make sure that increases. And this is what this middle section speaks to. So Chief Harden spoke about some of the lowest performing schools or an employee experience workshop that is being done. That's that 4th bullet, that year-long training centered on improving teacher retention. So that's some work that's happened at Berkmar. Okay, her team has come in and provided the admin team with leadership sessions. Okay, we've educated the staff there to make sure that this new and novice staff is well informed on leave procedures, employee relations, and other topics. An in-house ALP of sorts, an aspiring teacher leader program, right, to support teachers with specific school improvement items and help build teacher leadership in the building. And then I can't stress enough that it's in black because it's going to be consistent across the schools. This was something we piloted for the first time 2 years ago in the Meadow Creek cluster. The work with your team, Chief Harden, is so appreciated. This is where we looked and said, you know what, a new teacher is not just a new teacher. A new teacher who was program trained at GGC or at Kennesaw is very different than a new teacher who last year was in banking or who last year was in an alternate field. And Chief Harden's team recognized that, and NTO looks different for those folks. And we provide very structured supports for our alt certified teachers. That's happening with our teachers at Berkmar as well. So I do want to celebrate a couple things with Berkmar. It's not a slide, but what I realize is I'm just telling you all the interventions. I want to tell you a couple of things. And this is not in the attempt to divert you from the need of the building, being as transparent as I can, but I also want you to recognize I'm a very assets-based person, right? So I recognize deficits, but if that's all that you focus on, you end up with school climates like we just described, right? If we can tell the story of Title I schools for what it really is, the assets in those buildings, the retention rate it would take care of itself, right? These are communities where parents trust you, parents want to be there. These are kids who, when they overcome things, create, if we could tell that story, that asset-driven story. So, I feel like some of this is all support, which easily can fall into deficits. I want to share a couple areas of growth for each of these buildings. So, at Berkmar the other night, while we have a lot of work to do, there are great things happening, amongst the students. We recognized kids at the boards meeting the other night in their future student chef competition. We heard about the delicious food that they serve. They had Pro-Start winners recognized. Their last school council meeting, I was able to see a picture of this, in their principal corner with the community was highly attended. It was good to see this community out there at the school, feeling comfortable and being heard. You cannot improve attendance without partnership with the community. You just can't, right? So significant work in that way is starting to be done. And that's gonna be one of their focuses next year. Like if you could list 10 things that have to get better at Berkmar, numbers 1 through 5 are all student attendance. That they have to be at school. But that starts with a culture in the building that has to shift towards, you belong here, you're wanted here. When you weren't here yesterday, we missed you. And you know what? Because you weren't here 2 days in a row, I called your mom. And now mom's on my side. But that starts with that community trust that's being built. So there is specific work being done, particularly to develop, this principal was just named there. Can't fix it in a month, okay? His job was to go in there and build relationships in this short amount of time he had, and then begin to make some of those changes towards the larger cultural uplift that he needs to do in the work ahead. So a real robust plan has been developed to start next year strong regarding attendance, grad rate cohort work. You can get kids to 23 credits, but if your paperwork is not done right, if you don't use the synergy system right and mark kids and get your cohort work, that's an adult problem. To your point, Mr. Knudsen, about the adult role of the building, the leadership role. So we have cohort work happening there in partnership with other schools that do it well. Specific attention has been paid to the CLT cycle with Chief West team. We start to see that right curriculum instruction assessment cycle repeat itself in some of the CLTs that, quite frankly, it just wasn't happening yet. And multilingual supports. We're going to make some moves next year towards language goals in some of the training we do across buildings. This is work that this new principal has been doing, right? So language goals were part of the work done in Hopkins Elementary. We're moving language goals into, and that should be part of the language in every classroom in a building like Berkmar. So focus on language goals and additional support for MLs. Instructional conversations, which are, when they catch fire in a building, that's how you move a multilingual kid, right? Getting them to use their voice in a structured way. So we're starting to see some multilingual supports take place in small pockets in that building, but more intentionality paid to that next year. So I did want to celebrate a couple wins about Berkmar. Before we move to Radloff, any questions I can try to answer now? If not, I can get back to you with those answers.
Yeah, and what's your, what's the time block for our questions?
Well,
I know it's
I'm
shifted
on
to
11, so we just always schedule by about an hour, but we do wanna make sure that we're getting our questions answered. I just ask everybody to put mindful of what's equity. If you can, try to, synthesize your questioning and focus on questions beneficial for the entire group. If it's more like a personal wondering, then maybe you can take that offline. So, questions?
Thank you so much. Really quickly, I just want to commend the district for all the work that they're doing to improve our schools. And my question is, as relates to the supports and action as a part of the improvement plan, do our state lawmakers know about this work? Because it seems like, based off of my experience and my observations, that they are looking at data, right? And data is good to look at, right? But they're looking at our students with disability, they're looking at specific data, but it doesn't reflect the nuances of this data, like our attendance and the stories that were mentioned. And I feel that it has resulted in these knee-jerk, uninformed, and actually creative ways that the state is taking over local school districts. So I guess my question is, does our Gwinnett delegation know about the nuances of this work? Like, yes, they see, like, Senate Bill 2, is it 2.3? Like, they see the milestone scores, the graduation rates, but they're not looking at.
No, they don't watch the horizontal.
I can tell you, some of the work that we're doing around, retention scale that across, the state. So there is a lens on some of this work, not all of the work, but I think there's a high desire, at the state level to really bring Gwinnett into the conversation because of some of the work that's happening here.
Thank you. I wanna commend the presentation around the HR, in particular, when you stated, looking at the analysis and being able to real time course correct and sort of, looking at what's the return on investment and creating the strategies around your techniques. And we see that in the numbers, and I wanted to highlight that in light of our chief, Nebo, commenting on being asset-based, asset-framed. I appreciate that, uplifting that as well. I know, Mr. Nebo, Chief Nebo, this presentation around Berkmar High School, my son attended there, he attends there now, but will be going to high school next year as a senior for various reasons. And I wanna just comment on, Berkmar High School is sort of like a country in itself, for lack of a better word. It's very, very unique and different in many ways. And I didn't see anywhere here in the presentation where there was this focus on really understanding this cultural component that is really nuanced around attendance, which is related to the environment that we're going in now, or attendance related to work and community and financial struggles that really is outside the control of the school, but yet it impacts the school. So attendance around families working and children in high school now, if they're eligible, they're working. And so navigating responsibilities around job and working. So then what are the flexibilities around Berkmar High School and really navigating around that schedule? And maybe if there is something there that then you would see an increase in attendance or a different way in which it's tracked, that might be helpful, because it looks really, really negative on one hand, and it is, but then when you understand the cultural component, it's just so important, and I didn't see that here. And I think that really uplifting cultural competence, cultural relevance is so critical. Because the data and the tests and the numbers and the grades, I get all that, that's gonna be there. But if you don't address and understand the nuances around how lived experiences, backgrounds, identities, or how that's bringing that community into the school community, then of course, it doesn't really fully show the need, or it doesn't really show how we're addressing the need.
Absolutely. I can look further into what those efforts are around that, because you're right, the intersection between those two is undeniable, and kind of get back to you on that.
And I would just say, in general, I think that would be helpful in general throughout all of the presentations, because I think the schools that you're going to share is this cultural component that's so important. And when we talk about systemic inequities, to be clear, systemic inequities is the lack of AP classes. So for example, if we have one school or groups of schools that don't have a lot of AP access, and yet other schools do, the systemic inequity is all schools don't have access to AP courses. I just wanted to be clear around what the systemic inequity is in terms of access and opportunity. It literally is the system being able to say that one school or a group of schools don't have access in the same way that other schools have. And a lot of it is rooted in teachers not being available to teach AP, and then that's rooted in culture, climate, environment. It's just a trickle-down effect, but all of that is a systemic inequity, and I think we're just being conscious around understanding what that means.
I just want to say thank you all for very intricate and detailed information you're providing around how you support schools, and to hear that it's a collaborative effort. The level of detail you shared today was very enlightening. I also, in addition to expressing that sentiment, want to convey, our trust in that really, for you all to communicate and dictate where do we need to start, where are we, how are things going, this is where we're headed next, so that we can see progress. We don't expect to see something overnight, but we do expect to see progress.
And I think there's a both and in terms of the cultural shift, because with 75% of the students is Hispanic, when I look at the Hispanic community, there's some amazing, amazing things. The family dynamic within the Hispanic community is amazing. The work ethic. Well, we saw under COVID where a lot of Hispanic students weren't in school because of this sort of kind of survival aspect of the working, the hard work outside of school. And I was thinking, it just kind of struck me that we've got to work with, sometimes the culture works against us. A good culture, and the good culture is the emphasis on work. Whereas in America, in the United States, education and hard work, man, right, super high. If the families understand that the education, then coupled with that work ethic, is the key to incredible success beyond, right? Then they make sure the kid, and what struck me was work-based learning, right? If my son, my youngest son, figured it out, and his junior year, he was done at 11:30. I mean 12:30. And his senior year, he was done with school at 11:30. Because he did the work early and got involved in the work-based learning program and had a job and worked and played golf and did it, but he was only in four classes his senior year. And went on to an incredible access to a national training program because of the experience he had working, right, while he was in high school. I mean, so if we've got a culture that prioritizes work, how do we figure out how to work with that culture to help them understand that we can set your child up for amazing success and even help them in the family business or whatever, right, while they're still fishing. Dr.
May I make one comment?
Yeah.
First of all, you guys, this is great, getting the kind of detail that you need to make informed policy decisions. To put a sort of cherry on top of this notion of crafting opportunity for kids where there's already a little bit of a movement, like you said, let's say hard work. Palm Beach, where I was last, had probably, I don't know, 50% of our students were Latino. And what we did with CTE was weave in an entrepreneurial component to it, which is if you believe in hard work and you're interested in working with your hands, and you go through our program for plumbing or welding, then that upward trajectory could become you start your own business, right? And then you do X, Y, and Z. But there's a lot of other recent changes around the fear of being deported, et cetera, that's become real for these families. And I just think there's like this balancing act. We can't make excuses for the kids, but at the same time, we have to give them opportunity to understand you can move from working with your hands into owning a small company and really living out the American dream. The last thing I'll say is this, it's the nuance of using what the kids love to turn into why I'm actually going to school. A couple of examples of programs that were built in schools that were super high interest were like developing music, hip hop, writing through that, and I can share a few others that were really, really popular in Palm Beach. They had been working on CTE for 20 years before I got there, but I'm just saying, we added some value to that and spread it to other communities. So look what the signals are, what are the kids interested in, and fold that into that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think having the new principal in there, the tail end of this year, and creating some of those external relationships that he can then build on over the summer, it's going to be incredibly helpful in developing.
Everything he just shared, and I don't know what you're getting ready to share, Jay, but I thought I heard you all say you're gonna speak to this and how we're addressing that. I don't know if I missed that, but we have to get the kids in school, so if you would share
Yeah, so going back to my comment about we could spend really 5 hours on Berkmar, and that wasn't said in jest. We really could take that time to do it, and I know I need to probably use fewer words to enunciate the same points, so we can kind of stick to our calendar, our schedule, but Dr. Simmons, I tucked it in, admittedly, at the end, in the celebrations piece. So the work that's going to be done, okay, so a plan has been developed, a multi-step plan, and at the outset of it is that relationship with families. To the point, Dr. Teresa, that you made of understanding context and recognizing that reality affects a kid's ability to be in school, right? And sometimes it's because the work is honorable, but sometimes it's because the work has to happen for that families to make it from 1 month to the next where they are. But you can't understand that if you don't know your people yet, right? So the challenge for this new principal is building that relationship with families, but also not just him and the parents trusting the school. It's gotta be a two-way piece. So making sure that his staff follows the attendance plan that every school has to develop. So each school has to develop an attendance plan that details the intervention. We've always had that. But like with every plan, it requires monitoring. It really should be tailored to the needs of the community. I give you a generic plan that fits any school. Generic plan that fits any school ain't gonna fit this school. Right? So making sure that attendance plan is designed to uplift the needs of that community.
Yeah, I thought, in speaking with Alicia,
Dr. Carver.
that there was a new attendance plan being required in schools this upcoming year, so.
Yeah, that'll be part of State Bill 123, that's gonna go into effect, but we've always asked schools to complete attendance plans. We have a template that we designed for them, that they can use, so that's always been an expectation of school leaders in Gwinnett.
Maybe she wasn't aware that this was a new requirement coming up this year.
Yeah, and she might be speaking from the state lens, but we've always had one. In fact, her team with Ms. Baskerville, they've always been the ones to kind of provide that support. But yes, ma'am.
I just have one, and I'm sorry, I know we're coming up, just one quick observation and just a quick logistical question. So kind of going back towards Dr. Teresa's conversation about the culture and the community, and I think it's just remember what, we talked about at the end about the celebrations of Berkmar is the last school council meeting was the most well attended, which to me speaks of the community coming out to have that interest in their school and their child's learning and teachers. I think that's great. And then my real quick logistical question, I love how our T&L teams get out and our cluster superintendent get out, but I'd love to know, from our folks sitting on the desk, how much time you all spend in these level 4 schools, just being a face, listening in person, being live. I think for me, that's so important as a leader to have that experience. If you could share, from Chief West, Chief Harden.
I'll lean into that question because I'm probably, one of the ones here that probably has the least opportunity to be in the building. I think some's work drive them to be in the building more than others of us. But we do have intentionality, around what schools ran. I've actually asked already to, actually go out and ride with, Chief Nebel was one of the first CSTs that ever invited me to ride with him, in the cluster. And so I've asked Dr. Davidson, CST over Berkmar, if I could actually ride with him in the cluster. I think it's important for me to have a lens of what's happening in the building so that I can effectively lead the work and how we support those local schools. And it's important to have that visual. I've had my recruitment team go to Vice, Oakland Meadow, so that they can articulate to a candidate, what is that environment that they're going to walk into, so that someone doesn't walk into that building, whether it's as a teacher or a sub, so that they can articulate what's happening in that building in the recruitment process. That then leads to retention versus turnover. If we can paint an accurate picture of the work in the recruitment process, onboarding process, likelihood that that person's gonna stay increases. And so it's not just me making opportunity to get in the building. I have my teams in the building. The HR directors are in buildings every day. Our leadership development team, our leader coaches are partnering with principals, and they're in buildings regularly, every week. And so there's a thread throughout.
No, and thank you for sharing. I think speaking from, my experience, living in the corporate space for the last 25 years, I think it's so critical, and I just think of the show Undercover Boss. Whether it's once a quarter or once a month, just to, not to be out there to catch people on a gotcha moment because, you're at the top of the leadership structure. It's for you personally to get that perspective so you can do all the good work alongside your team and have that perspective. I think it's very important. So I want to empower. I'd love to empower all of you to do as much of that as you can.
So I think our support in SPA is a little bit different. So although as a chief, the first year and a half, we were really trying to get some practices and protocols and processes up and running. So weighted school assessment, making sure our dashboarding and data systems pieces were aligned. Made some revisions on the assessment side we'll talk about later. God bless you. But we've started to get the calls again. So team has always been going out to schools, but typically it's been around kind of unpacking very distinct pieces of information, like unpacking the district assessment results, that kind of thing. We are expanding and redesigning how we do that. It's more global. But when we go out, we're sitting alongside. So it's sitting alongside the teachers, sitting alongside the administrative team and unpacking their data, talking about what they really see in those pieces. But we're expanding that to connect the dots. So not just district assessments. How does that relate to our universal screener results? How does that relate to our milestones results? The team knows that I hate the term dead data. Data is never dead. And if you believe it is, then come sit with me and we'll have an autopsy. I always say we'll have an autopsy or a seance with our data, and I can tell you all the current things that are going on based on your dead data. So we have those conversations often, but we're expanding those. Principals already reached out for summer supports to think about as they're planning and developing their LSPIs and those pieces. So our conversation is more of a conversation than a visit. And so I hope that it never feels like trying to gotcha or trying to see a thing. We're always in that support space.
Excellent. No, thank you for sharing. Digress.
So,
So I think we talked a lot about like teaching and learning and their frequency. For most of our teams, about 80 to 90%, particularly with our specialists, they're in the buildings every day except on Fridays. For me, 9 schools nearly enough, and that's like an ongoing goal in every single year. I wanted to cycle back to the attendance requirement. I think what Dr. Parker may have been referencing is Georgia and TSS and that new shift, because attendance will be a part of the new Georgia and TSS process. So I think that may have been what she was referencing.
So, and similar to Berkmar, we're now going to talk about Radloff. Since you're somewhat familiar, having seen this in the Berkmar slides, this is just Radloff's snapshot. So again, we start with student demographics to orient you in the context of the 23-24 year, because again, a lot of the accountability measures were based on that year. So this is what that world looked like during that accountability period. So you see your student demographics, you see programs, and then you see staff demographics as well, in terms of race ethnicity. So the next one, again, gives you that kind of slightly deeper dive into student in terms of some climate culture pieces. Again, attendance, so always, if they're not present, they can't receive the information. Chronically absent, languages spoken, trying to give you, again, that kind of good snapshot of the school at a point in time. And so then we get into the student performance. And so again, a reminder for middle school, because they do milestones 6, 7, 8. This is an aggregation across all 3 grade levels. So when we're talking about math and ELA, it's all 3 grade levels. Science and social studies, that's 8th grade. So you see your reading on grade level, you see your high school readiness, that's based off of PSAT. And then your English language proficiency. And it gives you the school compared with the level. And then last but not least, the staff piece. So again, that deeper dive of certificated staff and experience compared to all middle schools in the district and then the district as a whole. And so with that, I'm gonna send it back over to Chief Nebo and he can talk about those supports based on that information.
Yes, I think you see a lot of similarities in the data. You look at teacher experience, you see the 0 to 5 year bar. It's a lot higher at Radloff than other groups, similar to what we saw at Berkmar. You see the attendance piece as well. So there's a lot of the same challenges, but there's still a lot of nuance that has to go into how you support a school. We picked Radloff because we wanted to represent each level, right? So we could have picked a couple different schools, but we wanted to make sure that from those list of 9 schools that had that intersection of all those different data points, we represented one from each of our levels. So Berkmar High School, now Radloff Middle School. Closer superintendent role, you see those 3 points that should be happening, and I can say that